Okay, we will have nursing research. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, our topic is all about quantitative research and qualitative research. So when we say quantitative research, you take note of the two words here, okay, the valid or the validity and reliability. So it is an approach to research in which variables are identified and measured in a valid and reliable way. So when you say quantitative, it is always expressed in numbers. The results of a research will always be with statistical tools and computations, while qualitative research is a naturalistic approach to research in which the focus is on understanding the meaning of an experience from the individual's perspective. So, the only way for us to understand the meaning of something is to qualitative research, and that is done through digging deeper to the experience of the individual. Next, we have here the differentiation of the of the quantitative and element quantitative and qualitative research. For the view of reality, for quantitative is always objective, so that is always in a positivist view. Okay, this is always in a positivist view. Let me just write it. Okay, when we say positivist, you believe in what you see. Okay, when you say positivist, you believe in what you see. Like for example, you have seen that the temperature of the patient is 39.8, then you would say it's the patient is convulsive or convulsive. Okay, while in qualitative, we use the postmodernist perspective. When we say the postmodernist perspective, you believe in multiple reality, or the reality is constructed by the individual, which would mean that you could not make a while researchers believe on what they see. So what they usually do in the clinical area, if they have seen that the temperature of the patient is 39.8, and when they feel that the patient is not that hot, then they would use another thermometer to check for the temperature of the patient, and that is a postmodernist way of thinking, and that is for qualitative research. Then we have the view of time, when we talk about the view of time, okay, reality is relatively constant for quantitative because we use a definite time when to conduct the study. And of course, for qualitative, reality is continuously constructed. It depends on the phenomenon that we are studying. When it comes to context, reality could be separated from its context, but because we use statistical tools to analyze the results of the research. But while qualitative research, reality is embedded in its context. So we have, for example, if we read qualitative research, then we could say that the reality is in there. So I mean, we could not take away the reality in a qualitative context because it is presented already on the presentation of the findings of the study. Yun talaga kasi yung laman niya, okay? We have the researcher approach. For quantitative, it's objective and detached. And of course, qualitative, we are personally involved because the researcher is the main tool of the study. For populations, okay, for quantitative research, we are after the Slovin's formula on how um, the statistician will compute for the population or the total representation of the population. But for qualitative research, it is individual cases represented as informants or key informants. Okay, it depends on okay. For quantitative research, we call this population as your respondents, but for qualitative research, we should call them participants. I will repeat. For quantitative research, we call them your respondents, but for qualitative research, we call them your participants. On measures, okay, human behavior or other observable phenomena for quantitative, okay, because you could already use the questionnaire to take or get the data, but for qualitative, you have to study the meanings that individuals create or how a certain individual would react to a certain phenomena or to the context that they are into at the present. Okay, for we have here observations. Okay, for quantitative, you analyze reality as definable variables. When you hear the word variables, when you hear validity, when you hear reliability, and that is more of a quantitative research. But for a qualitative research, we make holistic observations of the total context. So we dig deeper, we uncover, okay, we uncover, we discover, okay, we explore the experiences of individuals. So it must be a total or holistic observation of what is happening to the individual or the phenomenon that the individual is into. So with the design for quantitative, it is preconceived and highly controlled because you already planned what is your topic is all about. So you are now going to conceptualize what could be the congruent design that you will be using. But for qualitative research, it is emergent and fluid, and sometimes it is adaptable to informant's abuse. So, for example, you are just conducting a pure phenomenology, and then later on you have discovered that grounded theory is better than phenomenology. So that would tell you that you have to add more participants in the interview. For the analysis for quantitative data, it is descriptive and inferential statistics, or you hear or repeatedly hear the word statistics when you say quantitative, but for qualitative, we call it the method of data interpretation. Okay, method of data interpretation. Then we have what we call as method of data interpretation. So what are examples of a method of data interpretation? You have your Polizzi, you have your Georgie's, you have your Bantaam, your Van Manen, your thematic analysis, and so on and so forth. But again, we will discuss that again in the next videos. For generalization, for quantitative research, you have the use of inference to generalize from a sample to a defined population. So for qualitative, you have to transfer knowledge from a case analysis to similar cases. Then that's for generalization. And sometimes in case research or case analysis or single subject studies, they could not be generalizable to the whole population, or the findings or the results of the study could not be generalizable to the totality of the population. For reports, for quantitative data, you would say objective or impersonal reports because here your opinion or the opinion of the researcher is undetectable or could not be included in the study because we will just be basing our um, discussion to the findings of the study per se. But for qualitative research, interpretive reports that reflect the researcher's reconstruction of the meaning of the data. So these are interpretive reports. Sometimes we make metaphorical titles or categories or themes in the presentation of the findings of the study. Okay. Next, we have what we call as the mixed method research. So the third one is the mixed method research. If you think, okay, that your qualitative or the quantitative design that you are using is not enough for you to give the complete description of the phenomenon, then you could have mixed method research. In mixed method research, we have your convergent parallel, we have your embedded, explanatory sequential, and exploratory sequential. So later on, we will teach you how to make one mixed method research. For the quantitative research, um, it could be for the following purposes, of course, to determine the effects of an intervention, or for example, it could be done experimentally on how effective a drug or medication is to a certain disease, or measure the relationship between variables. These are what we call as your uh, correlations. Okay, you are looking into the effect of variable to the other, okay? Or you have to detect changes over time, and these are done through the longitudinal or the panel or the cohort design, okay? Okay, we have here quantitative research questions. Actually, these things were taught during our PhD at St. Louis University, but because we wanted you to become very good researchers in the future and for you to be able to understand or to be able to have the language of research, then you will have to study this one, okay? When you say the PICO or the PICO, okay, sometimes it's PICO, okay? There is letter T for the time here, but sometimes we focus on what is the PICO. The PICO is the population of interest. So what could be the population of interest? Is it a group of students, group of mothers? Intervention, understanding what you're trying to research on. Like for example, you're trying to test an intervention, and then you have your comparison, okay, and then the outcome of the interest. Like for example, population of interest, mothers who deliver um, at home. So what will be your intervention when they deliver at home? You provided them an environment where it is free from noise or something that is conducive for them to um, bear down on their own, because bearing down on their own is already a part of the evidence-based practice, that we should not be counting 1 to 10 for the patient to bear down. Let them bear down on their own. And then the comparison that makes up the control, then this, you also have a group of mothers who did not have the same intervention, and then what is the outcome of interest for you to be able to know if your intervention is effective on the group of mothers that you have decided to. Okay, so that is the PCOT or the TIFO. The characteristic of a quantitative design, it relies on numbers. So you already uh, know that it is all about a statistic. It's all about, it's all about numbers. Okay. And then of course you are studying objective to measure and quantify variables. And you will now be identifying your variables, and you should be comparing these groups in some way. So later on we'll talk about experimental and quasi-experimental, and applying these interventions to samples to generalize the study results to broader populations. So, for example, you're trying to test the efficacy or the effectiveness of a pathogen to cancer. Then later on, if you would have the results of that it's effective, then you could generalize that to, or that result to, the broader population. And if you are aiming to determine the effects of an intervention through a high level of control, so that could be done through experimental research. Okay, so we have here research questions. It will actually help you to determine if what design you will be using, if it's quasi-experimental or experimental designs or case control designs. But then again, you could just save this one or take a picture of this one as your example or as your guide when you will be determining your title for the proposal defense. In quantitative research, there is what we call interest in variables. So you will be hearing the word independent, okay, or dependent. So independent is an intervention, while dependent is an outcome. Okay. For example, when the researcher tells you that they will be utilizing the IV tadivy, then this could be talking about an intervention to the possible outcome. So an example here could be the objective characteristic of health could be measured in the form of blood pressure, heart rate, serum cholesterol, and other indicators such as cardiac risk. So what is your extraneous variable here? Okay, extraneous variables are not a part of the study, but still exert effort or effect, on the outcome. So extraneous variables, they are not controllable, they are not part of the study, and they are inevitable, but they could possibly affect the results of a study. So take note of the words independent, that is an intervention, and when you say dependent, that is an outcome. Next, the use of measurement in quantitative research. Okay, it could be direct or indirect. Okay, later on, your statistician will guide you on how to um, do this one. And values may be collected prospectively and retrospectively for longitudinal research. Okay, data may be gathered primary or secondary. We will be teaching you on what databases you will be using for the primary sources and secondary sources of data. And that would be on the week 5 of nursing research. Okay, the measures themselves, okay, must be reliable and valid. When we talk about validity and reliability, again, we have three types of questionnaire. We have the adapted. Adapted is you lifted the questionnaire from a source, like for example, the WHO and the DOH, and they're not. For example, the questionnaire completely answers your statement of the problem, and it's lifted from those sources. Okay, the questionnaire will not need to undergo validity and reliability. But if the questionnaire is self-made, okay, self-made or modified, or you have adapted the questionnaire and you have changed some of its portion, then it must undergo reliability and validity, or it must be checked by the pool of experts, and you will have to have the pilot study for your questionnaire. Quantitative studies are characterized by data collection using instrumentation. So as what I've mentioned, you have three types of questionnaire. Adapted, you lifted the questionnaire from a source, and it completely answers your statement of the problem. Okay, it will not undergo reliability and validity, but for modified and self-made questionnaire, okay, it may need to go for reliability and validity. And for the use of measurement in quantitative research, data may be collected in a single point in time or over time periods. So we'll be talking about later about longitudinal and the other designs that are under the quantitative than experimental design. Okay. Next, we have here comparison of groups. So when you say comparison of groups, okay, it must be done, or it could be done by comparing an intervention group or a control group, and these are usually done with experimental research. Okay. A priori selection of a design. So quantitative designs could be classified in the following ways. It could be experimental, it could be quasi-experimental, or comparison such as your correlational or time series, such as your longitudinal or panel or board design. Sorry, next. Okay. So we have the gold standard experimental design. So the gold standard is the experimental design because it again contains the three properties. What are the three properties of the experimental design? You have your manipulation, randomization, and control. So it is highly structured. Okay. It is considered or the best for evidence-based practice. Okay. So that is why it is called the gold standard because of its convincing power or support to the value of treatment. So this is again the gold standard. It's the experimental design. But for some other sources like your Magnaye and Riantin, you would tell that this is true experimental. But for Hauser in 2023, there is no longer true experimental, but it is what we call as the experimental design. Another one, okay. Experimental designs are referred to as the RCTs or your randomized controlled trials because these are involving highest, okay, or the highest level of control. So when you say experimental designs, they usually use this for clinical trials and they are considered the strongest evidence in the evidence pyramid. So in the evidence pyramid, I have here an evidence pyramid by the Google Scholar. But for the evidence pyramid by Hauser, it would be different. But then again, meta-analysis for now is considered as the highest, and background information or expert opinion is at the lowest or the bottom part of the pyramid or the bottom of the triangle or the evidence pyramid. So might as well you should not be believing too much to anybody else because when they are, for example, making stories out of a person, then it could be maybe regarded as an expert opinion. But again, if it's in the lowest or the bottom of the evidence pyramid. The characteristics of experimental design, these are the three conditions that must be met to draw conclusions about the cause and effect. The cause must precede the effect in time, or there should be rival explanations of the outcome, and the influence of the cause on the effect must be demonstrated. And this is based on, this will be based on how you will do your experimental research. Again, in experimental design, the independent variable is artificially introduced and subjects are only assigned to groups. And of course, experimental conditions are highly controlled and results are quantitatively analyzed. So don't forget that in experimental design, okay, you should be able to present the results in a quantitatively or quantitative manner. So again, this is a form or a design that is considered quantitative, and this is the gold standard for quantitative design. Questions that are best answered by experimental design. What is the population of interest, or who is the population of interest? Or how will the subjects be assigned to groups? Or how will the intervention be applied? Or what will be the comparison? How will the outcome be measured? Or how will the differences or the groups must be or be quantified. So do not forget that in experimental designs, guys, okay, you have to be very careful if you wanted to experiment on something, and you should be able to understand what are these things are all about. Okay, so again, when you say the population of interest, you must be able to identify who will be your population that will have the intervention that you will be introducing. Okay. So next we have when you say what is the population of interest? Okay. This is the objective inclusion and exclusion criteria that will help you as the researcher to consider and describe a specific population of interest. And when you say how will the subjects be assigned to groups, again, experimental designs are or it should require random assignment to groups, but multiple methods for randomization may be employed. Another one is how will the intervention be applied? Okay, when you say how will the intervention be applied, you carefully consider detailed directions for applying the interventions that will minimize error associated with inconsistent application of the treatment. And when you say what will be the comparison for some studies. Okay, the comparison is no treatment. Okay, that is a true control group. However, it is usually not ethical to withhold treatment from a patient in the name of science. That is why thus comparison is made to a standard treatment, or in some cases to a sham treatment, or to control a treatment effects. So when you say how will the outcome be measured, it must be reliable, it must be valid. Okay, these are required to minimize measurement error, to ensure accuracy, and of course, uh, a measure with precision. But when you say how will the differences between groups be quantified, the choice of the statistical test, as what it mentioned, is a part of the planning process. Next, we have here the strength of the experimental designs. Okay, these are the strongest evidence in practice, and of course, the conclusions are always definitive. It's nearly final, and of course, experimental designs are recognized by valued disciplines. That is why they use it for randomized controlled trials, and it is understood by the public because they could readily, the data are readily presented in a form that they could easily understood those findings. For the limitations, okay, please remember that despite their clear strengths, there is also a small percentage of healthcare studies that is based on experimental designs. Okay, additionally, of those experimenters reported in the literature, some studies are or may have serious flaws. For example, if groups may be assigned in ways other than random, or serious errors may affect the outcome. So this is um, in reality that although experiments offer many advantages, some of its disadvantages are associated with the use of this method. That includes the complexity and the difficulty of the method, and that the method requires substantial resources of time, researcher skill, and access to subjects. So the researcher must be skillful. Okay, you could not just do an experimental design of that if you wanted to, or as you wish to. So there are many aspects that, for example, that you could not control, like for example, the risk factor or the worsening of the disease. Okay, these are sometimes extraneous variables then. Or you have to, again, increase control means that the experiment becomes more artificial. Again, it will make it more artificial. Therefore, the findings may be uh, limiting its generalizability. Okay. Next is the quasi-experimental design, or okay, for the quasi-experimental designs, experimental designs that provide clear evidence of the effectiveness, for example, okay, of interventions, yet they're uncommon in nursing healthcare in general. So these studies use the cause and effect similar to experimental designs, but using convenience samples as the existing groups, as interventions. Okay? And this, of course, wala tayong random assignment dito, the lack of randomization. Okay? The primary difference between, of course, experimental and quasi-experimental designs is the lack of randomization. Okay? This characteristic weakens actually quasi-experimental studies when it is compared to experimental designs, because without randomization, it could not be assumed that the intervention and comparison groups are equivalent to the beginning of the study. And again, this leaves room for explanation for the outcome. So clear conclusion about the cause and effect could not be drawn for quasi-experimental designs. And of course, quasi-experimental designs often involve studying intact groups, okay? Such as approach may be employed because it is impractical or impossible to deliver the intervention to some members of the group, or to others. The strengths of the quasi-experimental design, of course, it is more feasible because you don't have to have randomization. And then quasi-experimental studies introduce a level or high level of control that reduces the effect of strange variables. Meron tayong pamamaraan dyan. And the subjects are more accessible for quasi-experimental designs. We have some limitations. Of course, we could not draw conclusions, okay, for this one because of the lack of randomization, and it will put the results into question, and groups may not be equivalent in characteristics such as extraneous variables that are introduced, and rival explanations for the outcome exist and may weaken the confidence in the results. Again, the results are not generalizable, and it could not be uh, forwarded as the 100% true result of the study. So we have tackled today what is a quantitative research in the form of experimental research, both the experimental and the quasi-experimental design. I'll see you in my next videos. Thank you so much.